Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I want to cover the Linux auditing system, otherwise known as Auditd, and how that can be beneficial to our security platform, and how we can configure the Auditd service, how we can configure rules, and ultimately how we can then get these rules into Wazuh so we can be alerted, say, if a user escalates to root and runs like a netcat command or something like that. So stay tuned and let's jump into it. But first, time for my shameless plug. If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Hire Us button at the top of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source technology, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo button and start exploring. Now let's get back to the video. So Auditd usually comes pre-installed with the Linux operating systems, and they're in most distributions. Of course, I guess depending on the image you grab, some may be more slimmed down than others. But if not, we can easily install it with RPM or Debian command. But these, and it's easy to install, pretty easy to configure as well. How it's kind of working under the hood is we'll be able to, once we install the service, we'll be able to create rules for it. And we'll go through that process, and these rules are basically telling the audit service, when do I want you to fire? Say, for example, did someone just run a TCP dump command? Did someone just escalate to root? Did someone, change the modifications of a file on the box? Really, any command that can be ran can also be monitored, which is great because this really gives us all of the insight we may need to investigate a user's activity or a program's activity, right? So say maybe some malware got on the box and all of a sudden it's, it opens up a backdoor and uses netcat, say example, to do that. We would be able to see that happening on the box in real time. And that allows our investigators to say, okay, we saw, actor X, Y, and Z log on to a box, but before Auditd, we're kind of blind to what exactly they're doing on the box, right? Like, granted, with Wazuh, we can get files that are created and added to a box, users that are added to a box, but now Auditd also gives us the ability to look deep down into everything that they're doing. So, say for example, if we want to go really paranoid and capture like CD commands, right? When someone's trying to change their working directory, we could see, okay, what directories did this user navigate into and what exactly did they do once they were there. And Auditd gives us the ability to do that. And also pre-built into Wazuh is the ability to send these logs to our Wazuh manager. So we can now build rules stating, so hey, I want a Wazuh alert to fire whenever someone runs netcat or TCP dump, right? And that fires, we get alerted on it on our end, and then we can dig into the alert further and do our investigation that way. So this is a really powerful tool to know exactly what a user is doing or even a program is doing on a box at any given time, which is really powerful and is great to add to the toolbox. So let's go ahead and get into installing Auditd. And here I'll just run a yum install audit, the audit package, and then the audit-libs, which will just be libraries. And you can see I already have them installed and they're already on the latest version. Like I said, it usually comes standard with Linux distribution boxes, but if not, you can just quickly run this command and it'll install, yum will install it for you, assuming that of course you have the repos added as you needed. But it should just be the base, CentOS base minimal one. And so we can go ahead and navigate into the directory. And so we have a few files here, our auditd.conf, our audit.rules. So this is the rules that are loaded kind of at runtime, right? And this audit.rules is populated by the rules that we have within our rules.d directory. So if I navigate into this guy, so all of our changes and our additions will be made to this file, this audit.rules file that's in the rules.d directory. So if we go ahead and open this guy, I think there's a few, there's a few that are done by default. So this just comes pre-bundled with the audit, system here. And we can, as you can see, there's not really anything in here. But so what we'll want to do is now create our own rules. And so for this demo, I am going to add some rules that will monitor any command that the root user runs. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Before we do that though, for this demonstration, we won't add very many rules. There's an awesome GitHub page that stores all these kind of best practice audit rules. So this Neo23 has a audit.rules file that you can copy and paste, and he has a ton of rules already pre-built in here. So it saves us the headache of having to create our own, which is great. But for this example, so here you can see he has a category of suspicious activity. So if a user ran a wget, if they ran a curl, we're now capturing, we'll have the ability to capture that within Auditd and then report that back to Wazuh as potentially suspicious activity, right? If someone ran like a wget out to download a malicious file that they have hosted on a web server somewhere, we would now have the ability to see that. And here you can see like netcat we were talking about as well. But for this example, I'm going to keep it short and sweet, but this is a great template to go off of when adding or when deploying this monitoring to your own servers. All right, and so now let's go into the Auditd rules, and I'll add my own that I have copied here. And so what these will do is track execution of binaries with the root user. So we see, so we have our base architecture. Of course, we're on a 64, so we could actually remove this rule. I don't need that. And but we are monitoring the user ID of 0, right? So the root user always runs with the UID of 0. So that's how we know that this rule will fire for any command that's ran by the root user. And then we also have this Auditd Wazuh-C. And what this does is, so Wazuh has a list compiled that are these audit keys. So this allows Wazuh to distinguish if it's a write command, a read access command, a execute command, or a system call. And Wazuh has these pre-bundled, so we're able to determine what command fits what category, if that kind of makes sense. So if we go on to our manager, under the management tab, there's a CBD list, and we see these audit keys. So if we go ahead and open this up, we'll see the keys that we have and their values, and these values come into play for our Wazuh rules, right? So something to kind of keep in mind, the rule that we're deploying here is not a Wazuh rule. This is a Auditd rule, right? So this rule doesn't correspond to what we have in Wazuh. And so these keys can really be, whatever you want. So if we go back to like the template file, this guy kind of categorizes them accordingly, depending on, what kind of rule he's writing. So he has some audit config, audit tools. Let's see, he doesn't have any here. Then he adds like shared mem access. So he's kind of he's using the key to describe what the rule is looking for. And so that's what Wazuh is essentially doing. So our keys will correspond to what the rule is currently looking for. So with in this instance, in our example, I'm looking for all commands that are executed by the root user. So I'm going to give it the key of the audit Wazuh-C. So I can then trigger my Wazuh rules to look for this specific key within the rule, and we can that'll be more clear here in a sec. I could also look for writes by the root user, right? So if I could create a rule that anytime the root user writes to a file, I would, instead of the audit-wazuh-C, I would use audit-wazuh-W to let me know that, hey, this is the write command, or this is a rule that is firing off of writes, right? So that'll, if it kind of seems confusing, it'll get more clear as you kind of get your hands on it a little more. But so let's go ahead and save this guy off, and then we'll go ahead and run this auditctl reload command to reload the rules that we just committed. And we have a failure. Let's see. Let me see if we output to a log command. Add this back in. Reload the rules. All right, and now let's see if we can. All right, in Auditd, outputs to var log audit audit.log. So if we go ahead and tail this guy, we can already see some of our commands come through, right? So we see that I just ran the tail command. What if I do, so let's go into temp, let's do like a TCP dump. So I run a TCP dump and we can see that it populated here as well, right? As saying, hey, you can see the working directory that I ran the command in, and I ran a TCP dump here. And we also get our key, right? So we're also seeing our key. If I do like a touch malware. So I now just created this malware file and then ran an ls. So we can also see then that I ran the touch command and I created a malware file, right? So we're now capturing, after a little bit of troubleshooting, we're now capturing any command that the root user runs, right? So now if I spin up another SSH session, right, we see that come populated in the background as well. So now, by default, I'm pretty sure Wazuh forwards these logs, but let's make sure that they are being forwarded. So if we go back into our osec.conf and we scroll down to the bottom here, we see our files that we're sending, and we actually are sending a var log audit.log, so that's good, and it's a log format as audit. Make sure that your agent is configured for this. It should be by default, but just to make sure, you can go ahead and check. And so now these logs should be sending to our Wazuh manager. So let's go ahead and now see what alerts are being generated. And so now we see some of our commands coming through. So let's go ahead and go to events. Let's see. So here we saw our TCP dump command, right? We can go ahead and filter this guy out, and we're getting a wealth of data, right? So we see that I ran the TCP dump. We can see the working directory I was in when I ran that command. We see our key come in, right? So that's also important. We get the full log. Let's see if we can find that touch. Yep, and here's our touch command. Let's go ahead and filter this guy out. And we see that I ran the touch command, right? And then we see what I ran it on was the malware. So now I know that, hey, I was in the root user. We also see audit the user ID, right? It's set to 0. If you could correlate this to other users, so you could see the ID of say 120, and you can say, oh, that UID is assigned to the user John, right? And you can know that, hey, the John user ran this command, ran a touch and ran and touched malware within the temp working directory, right? And so we get these parameters, I guess you can kind of think of. So, you know, the touch command was our command, and we ran it on malware. If I then ran, let's do an example of, let's say, touch, if I created two files, let's say malware2 and malware3, and ran that and created these two, I'll now, and if we go ahead and refresh, and drop this down, we'll now see the two parameters, right? Because on the command line, I ran touch, right? And then I ran malware2 to create the malware2 file, and then I ran malware3 to create that file. And so those are split up accordingly. So when you're looking at your logs, that's an easy way to determine, okay, they ran, you know, on the command line within one command, they ran touch space malware2 space malware3, right? And you can correlate that accordingly. So, you know, this is great, right? We're now getting all the commands that are being ran by the root user. And now let's make this, you know, let's now take this a little further and create a separate Wazuh rule for any command that's ran by the root user, because as of now, our rule description is just audit command user bin touch. Because as of now, our rule description is just audit command, right? From briefly looking over this, we would have to dig into what was the user ID that ran this, and say maybe I have some email alerting set up to say, okay, shoot me an email whenever a root user runs the command netcat, right? But now we don't have the ability to get that granular as of now, so let's create a rule that'll fire only on root commands, right? So let's go ahead and get into that. So go into management, go into rules, and I'll go into custom rules, and I'll go ahead and select the manage rules file so we can manage our local rules.xml file. And let's go ahead and create a rule and get rid of that guy. And all right, so here we have we're specifying our group name. So this is just the group name that's associated with the rule. Let me actually kind of step us through what we're looking at. All right, so we gave it a group name of root commands. We gave it a unique rule ID. We set it to a level 6. I'll just change this to 11 just for our demo purposes. And we're now giving it a if signature ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to see, so if we look on the right here, we see the signature ID that corresponds to all audit command rules, right? So anytime this rule fires, this rule is firing anytime the audit command is ran, right? And what we want to do is we want to make this a little more sophisticated and create a rule that says, hey, only fire when the audit command is triggered by the root user, right? So we're giving it an if signature ID of 80792, which matches this guy. So we're creating basically kind of a child rule of the audit command parent rule. So we're saying only fire if this guy fires. So 80792 fires, we then move on to our next block, which is looking for the field name. So if we scroll up within our log, we know that the root user always has a user ID of 0, right? So what we're now saying is the field name of, and this field name you can set equal to anything. You could do, you know, file inode, file name if there's a specific, maybe there's a specific file on your box, maybe like the Etsy password file on your box, and you want alert to be generated anytime someone opens that file or maybe cats out the contents of that file. you could do another rule similar to that with the field name attribute. So in this example, though, we know the audit.userid is always set to 0. You see the data in front of all of these field names. That's not needed for this parameter here. So we'll exclude that, but then we'll make sure that the period is there as well. So, and then now we're specifying what do we want that value to be equal to. Well, in our case, it'll have to be equal to 0 for us to know that it's the root user that ran this command. So if that happens, we then fire this rule. Rule description for this is audit root command execution, and then we take the value. We're able to, when creating our rules, we can we can assign variables, and it'll read out the value that's associated with that variable. So in this case, it's audit.exe. So if we go to our audit.exe, we would see that that value is /user/bin/touch. So we're now pulling that out within this rule, and we're saying with a login user ID to pull that as well. So in this example, it'll be 0 because I originally logged onto the box as the root user, where perhaps in your environment, let's say John Smith logged onto the box, he has a user ID of 100. John Smith then runs a sudo command. So he runs like a sudo touch, say malware 4, right? And runs that command. And so he's escalating his privileges to run this one command. And now with this new rule, his user ID of 100 would be the value in this case, would be the value in this field, and then we would see the executed user ID of 0, which is root. So our rule would read out, hey, this command was executed with the login user ID of 100, and we could then correlate that to John in this example. So let's go ahead and save this and restart. All right, and so that's restarted. So let's go ahead and expand this out and see if we can trigger some alerts. So let's just run a few. Let's do a TCP dump. Ran that out. Let's do a cat etc password. Let's cat that out. Let's see if we got a few of these to trigger. And so here we go. So let me filter just on this rule group. So here we can see our rule group coming in. And I filtered just on that. And so we have our two commands, our TCP dump and our catting out of the anti-password file. So I can now have, so we now see our new rule firing saying, hey, a root command was just, if someone escalated to root to run this command, TCP dump, right? And they did it with the login user ID of, in this example, it's 0 because I logged in directly as root. In the real world, this would be the user ID of whoever escalated their privileges to run it. And we then see, like in this example, we see the cat, right? And we see, well, what did he cat for? Oh, he catted for etc password. Say, well, that's, so now we're parsing out commands that are ran by the root user. And now let's take it one step further and only have us be alerted on specific commands or files, right? So like for this example, we have we see that the user catted for etc password. Well, that may be suspicious, or that is potentially a suspicious command that it can be ran for enumeration, right? If someone were to get access to a box. So let's build a rule that will fire on that accordingly. So if I go into here, and I'll copy out the examples that I have here. I'll increase the rule ID, if signature ID. So now since we know it has to be the root user, let's go ahead and make our if signature ID fire off of the previous one. So this rule will only fire if and be evaluated against if the rule 100,002 fires, right, which is the one above it. So in rule 100,002, we're parsing out the root user, and now let's parse out the file that the cat command was ran against, right, and fire if it's equal to a certain value. So we see that the etc password was file that was catted came in with this field name. So let's go ahead and implement that. So we have that implemented, and now we'll copy the value here. And we can say root command executed, or execution, etc password. I'll say etc password file. I'll say etc password file, because now it could be a cat command, it could be a nano, it could be whatever, right? So now we're monitoring only if a command is ran against the etc password file. So let's go ahead and save this. All right, and that's restarted. So let's go ahead and go back into this. Our rule group will still be, can still be root command, so I can stay filtered on that. So now let's go ahead and run that command again. So it's cat for etc password. All right, so now the root user has catted for a file that we are monitoring and has done. So let's do some other commands. Let's open the file with a text editor. I'll do it with nano in vi. All right, and let's see now what we have come in. And so now, after refresh, we see that, hey, something was done on the etc password file, right? So now we're seeing, hey, the root user ran something on the etc password file, and now we can expand that out, and let's toggle this guy in as well and move him over. And here we see the commands that were ran. So I opened it with vi, opened it with nano, and I opened it with cat. And yeah, so now we see our file that's being monitored. We are now alerted anytime someone interacts with that file, right? And in this example, it is the root user. So, we get a wealth of information that comes in with the audit service, and we're able to pump those logs into Wazuh and build intelligence around all of these logs. And as I mentioned, this GitHub page is a great template. The only thing you'll have to change, right, will be the keys. So, where he has the keys of suspicious activity, we would have a key of whatever is within our list, right, which that we see here. That's really the only change you would need. Of course, you could take out commands if you want that may not apply to your environment. So this is a great tool that's pretty lightweight, right? Like it doesn't consume system resources to a point where you can't run your business critical applications or whatever other services you're running on the box. And it's easy for us to pump into Wazuh and see exactly what's going on. And your possibilities are really kind of endless in terms of what you want to be alerted on, right? Like, so if I have sensitive files on my box that I want to make sure no one is interacting with, I can generate alerts to where if someone does interact with that specific file, I'll be alerted on it, right? And that's really powerful and gives us the intelligence that we need to kind of muddle out false positives and only be alerted on sensitive commands, right, that we want to be alerted on that can lead to an indication of compromise. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with me, and I look forward to our next video. And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.